Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at another Ryzen DDR5 overclock. This time we're taking a look at some dual rank 16 gigabit Hynix A die, because I finally have a kit of dual rank 16 gigabit Hynix A die. The kit was provided by KingBank, so big thank you to them for sending these memory sticks over. And the motherboard that I'm using is a Gigabyte X670 Aorus Extreme, which was provided by Gigabyte, so big thank you to them. And the CPU is a Ryzen 9 7950X, which I purchased, so big thanks to the channel supporters for, funding the purchase of the CPU. And with that out of the way, let's get into it, shall we? I guess I should point out, there's a fan sitting on top of the memory sticks. Because DDR5 runs hot. It runs even hotter when you decide to run it at the settings that we're going to be taking a look at here today. And then, dual rank DDR5 runs even, DDR5 tends to run kind of hot. Dual rank DDR5 runs hotter still. So, yeah, this is a pretty warm memory setup. So, now, if you weren't trying to push the timings as hard, you could get away with not using a fan, but where's the fun in that, right? So anyway, let's get the specs off screen and take a look at the settings. So because this is a lot of RAM, I decided to be a little bit extra. Also, I've not worked with dual rank DDR5, I have messed with like a 4x16 setup. On I think this CPU and this motherboard in the past. I don't think I ever made a video about that. So it's not like the first time I've ever tuned dual rank DDR5 on Ryzen, but definitely the first time I'm actually working with like 32 gig DIMMs. So yeah, I decided to actually run the memory stress test for a day and 10 hours. Just to make absolutely certain that there isn't some weirdness that takes just forever to show up, because, with DDR5, that's actually not completely uncommon, though at relatively low speeds on Ryzen, that's usually not an issue. It's usually that kind of behavior starts showing up once you're pushing like 7,000 plus, though with Ryzen, it's more like 7,600 plus. In my experience, but yeah, anyway, so just a ridiculous, 1 day, 10-hour Karhu run. Then I also ran two sets of Y-Cruncher. So we have one that's a mix of N63 and VT3, just to sort of make it a bit different, because N63 is like a different algorithm, and I think it is actually still... And you can see that this is over 9,000 seconds, so that's well over 2 hours of Y-Cruncher. And I'm just going to check what N63 is supposed to bias towards. Yeah, so it's sort of similar to VT3 in that it hits the CPU and memory pretty hard. I've not, ultimately, in my experience, VT3 is still the one that tends to crash more often, so just for good measure, I also just ran another 2 hours or over 2 hours of VT3 on its own. So yeah, this is very, very, so it's not a really big variety of stress tests, but the ones that I have run, I've run pretty exhaustively, I'd say. Also, we are on a 7950X, so we kind of, and it's not, I'm not air cooling the CPU for once like I do with the 7900X. So the CPU wasn't thermal throttling throughout the entire runtime of Y-Cruncher, it was more bouncing off of the power limit, which is up at, where is it? It's at 235 watts. So actually we might have had a little bit of thermal throttling because it was hitting just under 95 degrees Celsius, which is where Ryzen really starts to sort of, that's the safe max temperature. So if the CPU will do its very best to not go over 95. So yeah, but Y-Cruncher is a very spiky workload, so you get very high peak temperatures, even if the average temperature isn't actually that bad. So yeah, you might also be wondering what is up with the difference in test speed over here, because VT3 over here is running at 1.45 instead of 1.32, and I've not actually been able to figure out exactly what causes this, but I've run into this behavior before, and the fix was to just close all of the monitoring utilities and then start another Y-Cruncher instance, and then it ran at like the higher speed. So yeah, I think just having a whole bunch of stuff, like, because this was the last test I ran. So, like, I ran this first, and then I ran Karhu, and I think actually Karhu and Y, it might be specifically running Y-Cruncher after Karhu that slows Y-Cruncher down a bit. It could also be that this instance of Y-Cruncher actually loaded up more memory, because this is loading up 1.69 gigs, whereas this is loading up 1.78. So that might be responsible for that. Not 100% certain. But it's not like a sign of like instability or something. It's just, yeah, the tests weren't run at under the exact same conditions, so the run speed is slightly different. Anyway, I haven't talked about the settings that we're running here yet. Kind of dancing around them. So we're at 6200 CL26. Now this is a DDR5 6400 rated kit, and it does come with a DDR5 6400 Expo profile. I really wish that KingBank had put 2 Expo profiles on this kit, because to my great surprise, that 6400 profile isn't completely unstable on this 7950X. But on, say, my 7900X, this Expo actually just doesn't work at all. Like, it's unusable. Here, with the 7950X, you can actually run some, like, pretty heavy software. I didn't actually try stress testing it, because once you start tightening up the timings at 6400, the stability just sort of disintegrates, and it's better to run 6200 with tight timings than 6400 with whatever, the stability demands. So... yeah, so I really do it like this, and also just for people who don't really want to deal with overclocking their memory manually, it would just be nice to have like a like an Expo, like a 6000 Expo profile on the memory kit. Because the thing is with like that is actually just like a natively supported feature of DDR5 sticks is to have multiple XMP and Expo profiles. And this kit only comes with like one XMP and one Expo, and I don't really see a problem with only having a 6400 XMP profile. That's probably going to work under most circumstances. But the 6400 Expo is, yeah, that's not really going to work on most CPUs in one-to-one mode. So I would have liked to have seen a 6000 profile for that reason. And also, I decided against like trying to dial in the stability at 6400 because my thought process was like, well, if I'm going to be showing memory settings, admittedly pretty aggressive memory settings, but I'd like them to at least be, doable on a lot of CPUs. And 6200, in my experience, like there are actually Ryzen 7000 chips out there that won't do 6200, but they are very uncommon, especially on the latest AGSAs. So yeah, 6200 in my experience is like that should work on basically any CPU, and so I wanted to work with that, and then just tighten up the timings as much as possible, so we ended up at CL26. Because, I mean, these are, like, 6200 CL26 is sort of becoming a staple of my channel when it comes to Ryzen CPUs, because I think this is the 3rd time I've done it. Admittedly, this is the first time we're doing it on a dual rank memory kit. And the only real requirement for doing CL26 is that you have a motherboard with working high voltage mode so that you can set the VDD to 1.65. Because yeah, the VDD voltage basically dictates how low you can push the cast latency, and if you want to go below, like if you want to do CL26 at 6200, you need a lot of VDD voltage. So that's all there really is to that. So yeah, CL26, TRCD 36, TRP 39, which sounds really high. And it kind of is. But for whatever reason, lowering the TRP on this memory kit, and I didn't check if 38 at 6200 works, but at 6000, 36 didn't, and I didn't check if 37 would work. So there's like basically I didn't, like maybe 38 would have worked, but this is honestly really surprising to me that TRP is stuck at 39 because with Hynix 16 gigabit A die, it's pretty typical to be able to run the TRP at like, well, lower than TRCD. Like I would have really expected this to do like TRP 30, maybe 32, 39 is really, really high. I have no idea why. It doesn't want to go as low as like 32 or 30, but it doesn't. It will simply not run Y-Cruncher if I try to set the TRP that low. Also, it's not related to the RTP timing or the TRC timing because or TRAS. I tried loose TRAS, loose TRC, loose RTP, like RTP at 16, and then tightening up the TRP, and nope, it just, you touch the TRP timing on this kit for whatever reason, like you set it a bit below, like you set it a little bit too low, and it just immediately breaks, and it breaks way, as in it won't run Y-Cruncher. Interestingly enough, Karhu actually doesn't really pick up on that TRP issue, which is very strange. Yeah, and I've been kind of wondering, like, maybe it's a dual rank thing, but I kind of doubt that, because I think there are Expo memory kits out there that are like 3036 on dual rank. I think. Actually, yeah, I have one. We'll see that in a different video. But yeah, so very, very strange. But good to know that you can get Hynix A-die kits where the TRP just doesn't want to get very low. And I really don't know why. I unfortunately haven't yet like tried this memory kit on a bunch of different motherboards, so maybe it's some weird quirk of the AMD memory controller. Maybe this memory kit just does this on every motherboard, and like even Intel CPUs. And if it does, then I guess it's just like some Hynix A-die just doesn't like to pre-charge very quickly. You know, like that's certainly a possibility. Because I can't explain why the TRP just refuses to get lower than TRCD on this kit. Now, I didn't check if 38 works, but my reasoning there is like, well, 38 and 39 kind of perform the same. And I already know for a fact that the memory kit doesn't like having the TRP set to like, say, 36 at 6000. It like at 6000 I had to pass it like TRP 38. I didn't try 37, and it definitely won't do like 32 or 34, which would have been sort of my initial, like, it's an A-die kit. What kind of TRP should we run? 34 at 6200, and that just doesn't work. So, yeah, so I just left it at 39 because lowering it by one tick is not really going to change anything performance-wise, and if for some reason 38 didn't work, that saved me one cycle of, the stress testing process, though admittedly the TRP instability on this memory kit shows up super quickly in Y-Cruncher. Like, it is very quick to crash in Y-Cruncher. So, maybe I should have checked, but one tick of TRP is just not really the end of the world. Anyway, then we got TRAS at 30, which is just as low as the register goes. TRDs, which we're at 4.8. I think the TRRDL could have probably gone a bit lower. TFall's at the register limit. Actually, we should be doing this in the BIOS. Shouldn't we? Maybe. Yeah, that'll actually be more helpful, because the funny thing is, like, some people think this is a utility for configuring timings. It isn't. It's just for checking them. But yeah, anyway, so that's like the main point. So we're at 6200 CL26, just over like 3 hours of Y-Cruncher VT3. There's also some N63 mixed in, and then like 34 hours of Karhu. No errors anywhere. Actually, I don't think we don't even have any Windows hardware errors. Though Ryzen 7000 in my experience doesn't tend to spit these out, so I'm not sure that watching for these is even really something you should be doing, because I don't think I've ever seen any on Ryzen 7000. Like, they are a thing for Ryzen 5000 if you push your Infinity Fabric too high, but yeah, on Ryzen 7000 I really haven't seen that. So, yeah, I guess let's go into the BIOS and take a look at the voltages, and actually, like, at the rest of the settings. So, yeah, let's do that. I guess I'm committed to this take now. I hate my video production process. Oh well, if I just don't care enough, it'll be fine. Also, sorry about the shaky camera. The tripod is sitting on the desk, and the desk is very cheap and from IKEA. So, I mean, the fact that it's from IKEA isn't so much a problem as it being the cheapest desk they had. Anyway, so here we are in the BIOS. The CPU is, of course, completely on auto, because we don't want to, you know, cause issues by trying to, like, you don't want to create stability issues for yourself by messing with the CPU when trying to set up a memory overclock. Now then, the FCLK, so I do have the Expo profile turned on. Um, it's not required to do that, but if you're gonna, especially on Gigabyte motherboards, if you're not gonna turn on an XMP profile or an Expo profile, your memory training will take forever, unless you go here and turn on this. Yeah, manually. Also, I'm not sure if this is if I adjusted this or if the board did this. No, I don't think I adjusted this. I think this is from the board, because I wouldn't have used the one for the voltage step size. So yeah, these are like Gigabyte just preloads these settings if you turn on an Expo or an XMP profile, and they turn on the training runtime reduction, which like that's the main one for making like if your board is taking forever to post, that's the setting that'll make it not take forever to post. The downside to turning that on is you might find that it like negatively affects memory stability, but at low speeds that has not been my experience. It's mostly a concern for like very high speeds. So anyway, yeah. I guess also you could just try copying the Gigabyte training options that were on screen right there if you're not using XMP or an Expo profile when doing memory tuning. But if your memory kit has an Expo or an XMP, you should probably just turn it on because that'll automatically enable the training optimizations that Gigabyte has decided to go with for their motherboards. So anyway, memory multipliers at 62, which is how we're getting DDR5 6200 to work. Infinity Fabric's at 2066. There's a slight latency benefit for running 2066 instead of like say 2100 or 2133, but it's worth noting that 2166 and especially 2200 FCLK will actually just be, well, 2166 is like the latency ends up being roughly the same and there's a bit more bandwidth. At 2200, it's just faster. But the issue is proving that 2200 FCLK is actually fully stable is kind of a pain. And so instead of dealing with that, I decided to just go with 2066 on the Infinity Fabric here. So yeah, though ideally, from like a performance perspective, it is definitely better to run like 2166 or especially 2200. Like if you can prove that 2200 is stable, you should run it. And some of the signs of like your Infinity Fabric not being stable is weird, like stutters under load, audio cuts, that kind of thing. And my test benches don't have audio hooked up, so it's not really an option for me to verify Infinity Fabric stability right now. I also don't have the oscilloscope hooked up to the motherboard, so I can't even use the method of just seeing if the CPU is like basically like temporarily glitching out from the voltage waveform, which I've shown in a different video. So yeah, but 2066 Infinity Fabric, especially on the newest AGSAs, is a very safe Infinity Fabric speed, so that should have absolutely no issues with stability whatsoever at 6200. And then, of course, we have UCLK equal to MCLK, because the 2-to-1 mode is only, you should only use that if you're going for like 7, well, if you're going over like 60, like, well, so the thing is, like, running 6600 in 2-to-1 mode is just bad for performance and should not be done. But technically, most CPUs would probably require 2-to-1 mode for 6600 to work. And especially something like 7200, you'd be forced into 2-to-1 mode as well. But 7200 in 2-to-1 mode is terrible for performance. And also with this memory kit specifically, this kit doesn't go above 6800 in my experience, even in 2-to-1 mode. So Yeah, with dual rank Hynix A die, really, based on my experience, you should really be doing all of your tuning in one-to-one mode and just run like 6000, 6200, 6400 if you get really lucky with your CPU. So anyway, um, yeah, that's the UCLK MCLK over there. Now, I guess let's go through the memory settings. I have left power down mode enabled. Just didn't want to deal with like disabling that and the potential like stability issues that can cause. Same for gear down mode. I didn't bother checking if disabling it actually works. If it did work, that would give us like disabling gear down mode would give us like a performance benefit, but like for daily overclocks, I prefer stability. So, and being kind of boring in that sense. Um, anyway, so for timings, we've got again cast latency 26, 36. I've already talked about how TRP for whatever reason on this memory kit just refuses to get lower than TRCD. Um, TRAS at 30, which is the register limit, as in we literally cannot set it any lower. If I'm hitting the minus key on the keyboard, and you can see it just goes to auto because 30 is the register limit. TRC is at 69 because I do like to follow the rule of TRC is equal to TRP plus TRAS. I'm not 100% certain that that rule is completely like rock solid on DDR5. But at least it'll prevent you from like setting your TRC so low that things are unstable, generally speaking. Anyway, TWR is at 48, also register limit, literally can't set it any lower. TREFI is set at 65,535. This is the timing that is least likely to work if you decide not to stick a fan on the memory sticks. As TREFI is, well, it's not TREFI itself that is the issue, but the warmer your DDR memory is, the faster the capacitors in its like storage array lose charge. So if your memory sticks are very warm and you're not refreshing them very often, your data just kind of disappears after some time. So yeah, if you're not going to run a fan on your memory sticks, you're probably going to be forced to run your TREFI significantly lower, like say 40,000 or 32,000, or if you're running the memory sticks really, really, really hot, potentially like 10,000, which will be awful for performance. And I think your memory sticks would probably have to be at like 90 degrees to require that, but which is probably not great for the memory sticks themselves if you're running them at high voltage. But yeah, I like if you want fast DDR5, you should just run a fan on the memory, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, TRFC at 444. This is specific to Hynix 8i, and technically it could be lower, but also at the same time, it's worth noting that if your refresh interval is 65,000, tuning TRFC to its absolute limits is a bit of a waste of time, because going from, say, 400 to, say, I think at 6200, it should actually bottom out at like 390 or 380 or something. Yeah, it's really not going to change performance very much when we're only refreshing every 65,000 cycles, right? Spending 450-ish cycles on a refresh instead of 390 cycles every 65,000 cycles just doesn't really matter, right? What's 50 cycles every 65,000 cycles? Basically nothing. So yeah, TRFC2 and TRFC same bank aren't used on the AMD memory controller, as far as I know, even now. So we can just leave those on auto. RTP's at 12. This could have maybe gone lower, but not much lower, in my experience, than TRRDL at 8. Decent chance 6 would have worked, but I was having some stability issues with this setup when I was like setting this up, and one of the things that I raised to sort of counteract that was TRRDL, as on some kits, and this does, in my experience, vary like by silicon quality as far as I can tell. Like some kits can run low TRRDL, some kits can't. It's kind of random. Some of them get better with extra voltage, some of them not necessarily, or they need even more voltage than other kits. So yeah, and also the memory controller will generally try to avoid using the TRRDL timing, so having it at 8 isn't really the end of the world from like performance-wise. It's really not a massive issue. So Leaving it at 8 is just kind of like, yeah, whatever. TRRDS, on the other hand, is at 4, and in my experience, basically every Hynix A-die kit should be able to, Hynix 16 gigabit A-die kit should be able to do TRRDS at 4. TFAL's at 20 because that's the register limit. We literally can't set it any lower than that. TWTRL is at 16. I think there's a small chance it might have done 14, but I didn't test for that. WTRS at 4. I didn't try a lower value. It might do 3, maybe. Not 100% certain on that. TRD or read-to-read SCL, we've got 4. Read-to-read SC 1. So these are your single rank timings, these two right here. So yeah, these are the same as what I would run for a single rank setup. And then we get to the dual rank timings, which are same DIM and different DIM. I set both of them. As far as I know, AMD doesn't have that funky bug that Intel has where the names are switched. But I also haven't checked, and it's just easier to set both of them to the same value and just not worry about that. So that's what I go with. So yeah, these are both at 6. I did try 5. It doesn't work, which is kind of surprising. So, because I think on Intel, yeah, off the top of my head, on Intel, you can actually run the, like, same DIM and different, like, the dual rank read-to-read timings below the single rank read-to-read timing. At least the slow one, because technically the different group timing is fast. But yeah, on AMD, for whatever reason, that doesn't work. So, yeah, 6 on that. Right to right at SCL's at 2. Then, of course, the other one is at 1. It doesn't go lower than 1. And then we have 6 again. For this, I didn't check if 5 is possible, because even on Intel, the right to right timing just doesn't go very low for different memory ranks, interestingly enough. Even though, like, right to right on the same memory rank, yeah, that goes very low, which is just a Hynix thing. And then we have right to read and read to write, which are at 4 and 16. And these are just sort of what I go with a lot of the time. These aren't different from what I would use for single rank. I also didn't check if they could go lower. Yeah. So that's all the timings. In terms of the actual, like, resistance configurations, everything is on auto, because the board seems to do a perfectly good job of it on its own. I did actually try messing with some of these and made things worse. So yeah, that's kind of that there. Or, like, I guess I could have just set everything to what the board defaults to, but that's literally the same as just leaving them on auto. In my experience, like, I haven't seen Gigabyte boards, like, changing the termination settings that with, like, reboots. Yeah, I haven't seen that happen. Gigabyte basically seems to have, like, a set of auto termination settings that they like to use, and the board just kind of goes with those every time it boots up. So, at least as far as I can tell, that seems to be what's going on there. Anyway, let's move on to the voltages. So SoC, we're at 1.225 because for DDR5 6200, this CPU really doesn't need a lot of SoC voltage. So we're going to run it at 1.225. This is not minimized, by the way. It might work at even lower SoC voltage. I didn't check. 1.225 is low enough that, yeah, like, I'm also not pushing the Infinity Fabric super high. If I was really trying to max out the Infinity Fabric, I'd be more concerned about minimizing the SoC voltage. But the thing is, there's a balancing act. If you want to write high memory clocks in 1-to-1 mode, you need a lot of SoC voltage. Like, for 6400, which this CPU can actually kind of run with this memory kit, 1.3 volts SoC is absolutely required. It will simply not work at anything less than 1.3 SoC. So, you know, that's just how the Ryzen memory controller is. It's just like, you want to run high memory clocks in 1-to-1 mode, you need a ton of SoC voltage. But if you want to run very high Infinity Fabric clock, you actually want usually less than 1.2 volts of SoC voltage for full Infinity Fabric stability, especially if you're trying to go for, like, 2200 Infinity Fabric, in my experience. So yeah, now I'm not trying to push the Infinity Fabric super high, but at the same time we are at 6200, so, you know, I'm not 100% certain that, say, 1.15 SoC would actually work at 6200. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of that. Is like, there's no reason, and like with this CPU at 6200, there's no reason to run 1.3 volts SoC. At the same time, this like voltage that I ended up at, like it's perfectly safe. Even 1.3 volts is safe. That's why there's a 1.3 volt limit, right? That's the safe limit. That's why it stops there. If it wasn't safe, they would have set the limit lower. Um, but yeah, um, there's it's just like a kind of random number that happens to work. There's really no better description for why that voltage is the way it is, because I really didn't spend like time trying to minimize it. So anyway, then we get to the VDDIO, and that one is interesting because it's like really low, even by what I usually run on Gigabyte motherboards. Like this is very low, 1.25. And that seems to be a dual rank thing. For like single rank, I would use significantly more VDDIO mem, but for whatever reason, with dual rank, this seems to work best. And the same is true for VDDQ. And actually, for VDDQ, it seems to be more so. Um, so, yeah, very interesting. That like this dual rank setup, it seems to really like very low I/O voltage, very low VDDQ voltage. Um, but it passes all the stress tests. So, you know, I am not going to question it because it's really that simple as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, the VDD is very, very high at 1.65 volts because that's how you get CL26 to work. Now, let's say you have a motherboard where high voltage mode isn't working, and high voltage mode is just the ability to go over 1.43 volts on Gigabyte boards, and for everybody else, it's being able to go over 1.435. So let's say you wanted to run like 1.4 volts instead of 1.65 volts. What would the difference be? Well, the difference would basically be something like well, actually, not even that. It'll probably, yeah, that would basically be it. Uh, yeah. That actually, you might even still be able to run TRCD at 36 with 1.4 volts. But that really varies by memory quite a bit. So the 1.65 volts here is it really is just about getting the cast latency down to 26. Is that actually like, should you do that? No, but it looks cool. Like, and by should you do that, like, does it have a major performance benefit? Nope, not really. But it looks cool, right? Like CL26 is just cooler than the CL20, like 30 or whatever. Um, and I am actually being completely serious about that. So, yeah. And also, in my experience, like I've done this like 6200 CL26 setup like multiple times across multiple boards at this point, and it works very well in my experience. That's why I tend to do it so often. Is just like, yeah, it works. Really, the only requirement is just being able to set the VDD voltage high enough, and that's it. Like if you can set 1.65 volts VDD, you can do 6200 CL26. There's really no other requirements for it in my experience. Um, so why not? You know, it's like, well, like these memory sticks, like like the memory sticks have high voltage mode working. The motherboard has high voltage mode working. So I have a fan on the sticks anyway. So 1.65, here we go. CL26. So, yeah. But again, you know, if you want to run something lower, you would basically just have to raise the cast latency. Um, anyway, for advanced voltage settings, I do have the VDDP all the way at 1.15. I did not spend a ton of time tuning that, so it's possible that something less than that would also work. And this is basically the voltage that this board likes to default to for VDDP. And at low speeds, this actually works just fine. And I think in in 1-to-1 mode, it might actually be optimal to run relatively high VDDP like this. But in 2-to-1 mode, in my experience, this can actually be like not helpful to stability. You might actually end up having to lower VDDP. But that setting really varies a lot by motherboard, maybe even by BIOS revision. But yeah, we're in 1-to-1 mode. This works. I also don't think I really tested like if 1.1 volts or 1.05 volts would have worked better. I don't think there's any reason to be concerned about this harming the CPU, as the boards, like a lot of boards, tend to default to like 1.15 VDDP. So, yeah. And then for VDDGs, we're at 950, which, well, I wouldn't really, well, especially for IO die voltage, I wouldn't go over 1,000, just because in my experience that causes instability. But also there's like, I don't see a reason to try minimize these. I guess it might shave off some SoC power consumption or something, but yeah, anything from like 800 to 950 for these, in my experience, is just like, yeah, that's just fine. So yeah, and that's it. I don't think I changed didn't change anything else. So yeah, that's 6200 CL26 on a 64 gigs of DDR5, right? 2x32 gigabytes on the X670 EA Aorus Extreme. So yeah, that's kind of it. In terms of like I mentioned, if you're going to be running if you're going to be running dual rank Hynix 8i, then you can basically, like, you should be more or less able to copy my settings. Now, the two settings you won't really be able to copy if you're on, like, say, an Asus or an ASRock motherboard, or probably even an MSI board, is the VDDIO and VDDQ voltages, because in my experience, these are actually very dependent on the motherboard that you're using. And Gigabyte seems to like them really low compared to everybody else. So, yeah, those would be like, don't just try to copy those if you don't have a Gigabyte motherboard. But if you have a Gigabyte motherboard and you have a dual rank Hynix 8i kit, I would be pretty surprised if you couldn't just basically just copy my settings and have them work. Yeah. Though, admittedly, there are some CPUs that won't do 6200 in 1-to-1. Those are very rare, but they do exist. So, yeah, that is something to keep in mind if you're thinking like, oh, I'm just going to copy these settings and then it doesn't post. Try just, like, the first thing I would try is actually just drop the memory speed down to 60. Oh, and then the other thing to watch out for is like the very high VDD voltage. That doesn't always work on every motherboard. So yeah, don't just, like, man, this is the issue with, like, me having fun with the memory overclock. Is like, like CL26 is just cooler than like CL30 or something, but the downside is, like, yeah, 1.65 volts on some on some BIOS versions will just cause the motherboard not to post. That's like the main issue. Now, I think that's mostly fixed on the latest BIOSes. As in, I haven't seen too many complaints about that being an issue, but then also, I don't know how, like, I kind of doubt that a lot of people try to set their memory voltage above 1.43 volts. So, that might be part of that. Yeah, like, in terms of the subtimings, though, those really, in my experience, aren't affected. Like, the subtimings I'm using here, like, they will actually work at even very reasonable voltages. So, yeah. It's just the like CAS latency and TRCD, where it's like, yeah, well, the CAS latency definitely requires a lot of voltage, and the TRCD depends on the memory kit to some extent. But yeah, like all the advanced timings, you can basically just copy them, and it should work, in my experience. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful. If not well, oh no, wait. Whatever. Hopefully you find this somewhat helpful, and yeah, that's it for the video. So big thank you to KingBank for the memory kit, and thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There is a link to that down in the description below. That's how I fund things like, say, the 7950X that I'm using here. And there's also the Teespring store where there's shirts, hoodies, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. And I've also got a Bandcamp if you want to abuse your eardrums for some reason. So yeah, links to all of that in the description would be much appreciated if you check them out. And that's it for the video. So thank you for watching and goodbye.